powerful quake rocks Turkey and Syria, kills more than 1,300. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake rocks southeastern Turkey and northern Syria early Monday, killing hundreds. A powerful 7.8 magnitude earthquake rocks southeastern Turkey and northern Syria early Monday, toppling hundreds of buildings and killing more than 1,300 people. Hundreds were still believed to be trapped under rubble, and the toll was expected to rise as rescue workers searched mounds of wreckage in cities and towns across the area. On both sides of the border, residents jolted out of sleep by the pre-dawn quake rushed outside on a cold, rainy and snowy winter night, as buildings were flattened and strong aftershocks continued. Rescue workers and residents in multiple cities searched for survivors, working through tangles of metal and giant piles of concrete. A hospital in Turkey collapsed and patients, including newborns, were evacuated from a handful of facilities in Syria. In the Turkish city of Adana, one resident said 3 buildings near his home collapsed. "I don't have the strength anymore," one survivor could be heard calling out from beneath the rubble as rescue workers tried to reach him, said the resident, journalism student Mohammed Fadi Yavis. Farther east in Diyarbakir, cranes and rescue teams rushed people on stretchers out of a mountain of pancaked concrete floors that was once an apartment building. The quake, felt as far away as Cairo, was centered north of Gaziantep, a Turkish provincial capital. It struck a region that has been shaped on both sides of the border by more than a decade of civil war in Syria. On the Syrian side, the swath affected is divided between government-held territory and the country's last opposition-held enclave, which is surrounded by Russian-backed government forces. Turkey, meanwhile, is home to millions of refugees from that conflict. The opposition-held regions in Syria are packed with some 4 million people displaced from other parts of the country by the fighting. Many of them live in buildings that are already wrecked from past bombardments. Hundreds of families remain trapped in rubble, the opposition emergency organization, called the White Helmets, said in a statement. Strained health facilities and hospitals were quickly filled with wounded, rescue workers said. Others had to be emptied, including a maternity hospital, according to the SAMS medical organization. "We fear that the deaths are in the hundreds," Mahib Ghadour, a doctor, said by phone from the town of Atme. Turkey sits on top of major fault lines and is frequently shaken by earthquakes. Some 18,000 were killed in powerful earthquakes that hit northwest Turkey in 1999. The U.S. Geological Survey measured Monday's quake at 7.8. At least 20 aftershocks followed, some hours later during daylight, the strongest measuring 6.6, Turkish authorities said. Buildings were reported collapsed in a wide area extending from Syria's cities of Aleppo and Hama to Turkey's Diyarbakir, more than 330 kilometers, 200 miles, to the northeast. Nearly 900 buildings were destroyed in Turkey's Gaziantep and Kahramanmaraş provinces, said Vice President Fuat Oktay. A hospital collapsed in the Mediterranean coastal city of Iskenderun, but casualties were not immediately known, he said. Unfortunately, at the same time, we are also struggling with extremely severe weather conditions, Oktay told reporters. Nearly 2,800 search and rescue teams have been deployed in the disaster-stricken areas, he said. "We hope that we will get through this disaster together as soon as possible and with the least damage," Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan wrote on Twitter. Countries from Taiwan to Russia to Germany offer to send help, whether medical supplies, search teams or money. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Agency said at least 76 people in 7 Turkish provinces. The agency said 440 people were injured. The death toll in government-held areas of Syria climbed to 237 with more than 630 injured, according to Syrian state media. At least 47 people were reported killed in rebel-held areas. Buildings were reported collapsed in a swath from Syria's cities of Aleppo and Hama to Turkey's Diyarbakir, more than 330 kilometers, 200 miles, to the northeast. In Turkey, people trying to leave the quake-stricken regions caused traffic jams, hampering efforts of emergency teams trying to reach the affected areas. Authorities urged residents not to take to the roads. Mosques around the region were being opened up as a shelter for people unable to return to damaged homes amid temperatures that hovered around freezing. In Diyarbakir, rescue teams called for silence as they tried to listen for survivors under the wreckage of an 11-story building. Rescue workers pulled out one man, carrying him on a stretcher through a dense crowd of hundreds of people anxiously watching the rescue efforts. A gray-haired woman wailed before being escorted away by a man, while a rescue worker wearing a white helmet tried to calm a crying girl, who was also being cuddled by two friends. The quake heavily damaged Gaziantep's most famed landmark, its historic castle perched atop a hill in the center of the city. Parts of the fortress's walls and watchtowers were leveled and other parts heavily damaged, images from the city showed. In Diyarbakir, hundreds of rescue workers and civilians formed lines across a mountain of wreckage, passing down broken concrete pieces, household belongings and other debris as they searched for trapped survivors while excavators dug through the rubble below. In northwest Syria, the quake added new woes to the opposition-held enclave centered on the province of Idlib, which has been under siege for years, with frequent Russian and government airstrikes. The territory depends on a flow of aid from nearby Turkey for everything from food to medical supplies. The opposition's Syrian civil defense described the situation there as disastrous, adding that entire buildings have collapsed and people are trapped under the rubble. In the small Syrian rebel-held town of Asmaran in the mountains by the Turkish border, the bodies of several dead children, wrapped in blankets, were brought to a hospital. The USGS said the quake was centered about 33 kilometers, 20 miles, from Gaziantep. It was 18 kilometers, 11 miles, deep. At least 284 people were killed in 10 Turkish provinces, with more than 2,000 injured, according to Turkey's vice president. The death toll in government-held areas of Syria climbed to 239 people, with some 600 injured, according to state media. In rebel-held areas, at least 147 people were killed, according to the White Helmets, though the SAM's medical organization put the toll at 106, both said hundreds were hurt.